Toyota is a well-known manufacturer of automobiles, arguably the most successful company to ever do it. That is a bold statement, but in 2023, they sold 11.23 million vehicles around the world, and by that measure, they are the biggest. It has been kind of a back-and-forth battle between Toyota and Volkswagen for that #1 spot, but Toyota has been coming out ahead for the past few years. Also, the Toyota Corolla, I'm sure we're all at least familiar with it, considering it is the best-selling car of all time. It was introduced in the 1960s and has consistently been offered by Toyota in different generations ever since. In 2021, it became the first car to ever sell over 50 million units. These are all crazy numbers, by the way, that have clearly never been reached by anyone else. Around $300 billion in annual sales makes Toyota the 19th largest company in the world, with over 375,000 employees. I think it's impressive looking at how much they have been able to achieve over the years, especially when you factor in their humble beginnings and some major setbacks over the years. For this video, I want to focus on the foundation and growth of Toyota while highlighting 3 significant struggles that they've been able to overcome, because to use a driving metaphor, I find it inspirational to look back at the bumps along the road that they have had to pass to get to where they are today. The person responsible for starting Toyota was Kiichiro Toyota, spelled with a D, all the way back in the 1930s. See, his father was heavily involved in the Japanese textile industry. He had recently invented the automatic loom and established his own company to capitalize on it. Kiichiro started an automotive segment originally as part of his father's company, with the Model AA sedan being the first car that they produced in 1936. Shortly after, the Toyota Motor Company was established. You'll notice, now spelled with the more familiar T instead of the D, and the reason that they changed it isn't incredibly clear. To my understanding, the number 8 is considered really lucky in Chinese culture, and Japanese culture as well to an extent, and altering the spelling made it so that when you write it in Japanese, it takes 8 strokes to do it instead of 10. That is the main reason that they provide, and to me, that sounds like a wild reason to change the name of your company. They also say that the new name sounded more appealing, likely to an international market, so I'm going to guess that that was a bigger factor in the decision. Either way, I hope we can all agree that starting a car company in 1930s Japan was not the ideal time or place, being right before the start of World War II. It had such a negative impact on Toyota that it is going to be the first major setback on my list. Things got really serious. During the war, practically all production was dedicated to the war effort. Toyota stopped making consumer cars altogether in favor of making trucks for the military, but materials were scarce, so most of these trucks were not the highest quality. Some were made with wooden seats or maybe one headlight in the middle. Toward the end of it, they were salvaging parts from old trucks and reusing them to build the new trucks. And then when the war ended, things got even worse. The scarcity of supplies continued. Meanwhile, the Japanese economy was in poor condition, to say the least. A lot of people there could hardly afford to buy food, so they certainly weren't buying cars. And since government policies put in place to fight inflation made it difficult to secure loans, there was very little money coming in. They couldn't afford to pay their employees properly, so they went on strike, which caused production to drop significantly, worsening the situation. Founder and president Kiichiro Toyota then resigned from the company and ended up passing away from an unrelated brain hemorrhage only 2 years later. I know I'm a little scattered trying to explain the situation here, but things were chaotic at the time. In short, the Japanese economy following World War II put Toyota on the verge of bankruptcy, and it's almost a miracle that they survived it at all. They ultimately worked things out with the labor unions in an agreement that involved a 25% reduction in their workforce. They secured a loan, with one of the terms being that the sales division would be separated into its own company, where it remained for over 30 years. But the biggest part of the comeback, I would say, was the Korean War. Japan is close to Korea, so early in the war, the US military ordered almost 4,700 trucks from Toyota, and that was the spark that was used to reignite the business. It's kind of strange to think that World War II sent them down into a tailspin, whereas the Korean War helped put them back on course. cars. It's hard to predict how these bigger events can affect companies like this, especially considering that Toyota cars had never been available in the United States at this point. And that is going to lead me straight into the second setback on my list, entering the US market. Obviously, the United States is a large country with millions of drivers, and in the 1950s, with all the new roads being constructed and people buying cars for the first time, it was a very attractive market for an automaker. To be perfectly clear, Toyota has always been a Japanese company that has had a strong connection to the United States. Before they ever even made their first car, Toyota went to the US to visit a bunch of production plants to better learn how the cars were being made in the country. A similar thing happened in the 1950s, where the management team from Toyota flew to the US to visit production plants so they can learn how to make their operations more efficient. So, in 1958, with high hopes and large ambitions, Toyota started selling cars in the United States, with the first one being the Toyopet Crown, and it was a total disaster. The car was not considered to be especially quiet or reliable, or honestly even built for the US market. It topped out at 75 miles per hour, so most consumers viewed it as not being powerful enough, too expensive, and even the name Toyopet did not go over well. It was sold in the country for only 4 years before being discontinued, selling less than 3,000 units over that time. For comparison, the leading brands were selling over 1 million each year, so any way you look at it, this was underwhelming and not a promising entry into the US market. However, they came back strong. In 1965, with their first car to become popular in America, the Toyota Corona.
More of what you want in a new car. A 90 horsepower engine goes 0 to 60 in 16 seconds.
They dropped the Toyopet name, gave it a more powerful engine capable of speeds much higher than 75 miles per hour, and overall, it was tailor-made for the American market, and the sales reflected that. In the 1970s, Toyota passed Volkswagen to become the most imported car brand in the US, and became widely recognized for their new slogan, "You asked for it, you got it." In the 1980s, they started manufacturing cars in the US for the first time, initially under a joint venture with General Motors, America's largest car maker, but then opened their own production facilities as well. In 1989, they introduced a new luxury brand called Lexus that took a little more than a decade to become the best-selling luxury brand in the country. That was also the year that they introduced that familiar logo that we all know, partially to differentiate it from the Lexus cars, but mostly to establish a more uniform global identity. They even say that the outer circle is meant to represent their global reach. And I don't even think I have to mention the Prius hybrid vehicle. I think we all know how popular that became, the Scion, and the Camry that consistently ranks as America's best-selling car. In 2021, Toyota sold more cars in the US than General Motors, marking the first time that GM wasn't the country's top-selling car maker in 90 years. Now, they have since lost that title, but the US continues to be Toyota's biggest market. Compare that to those 1950s numbers, and we can visualize how far that they have come. They are now beating US companies in their own territory, and that is crazy to think about. The final setback that I want to talk about is a little more general, but I'm going to put a few different events under the category of recalls. Just to be clear, compared to the other two on my list, these occurred much later, when Toyota was much more established in Japan and the US and the rest of the world, so none of it has realistically threatened the company's existence. But I think these are still significant because they have been a threat to their leading position, their finances, their reputation, and the safety of the drivers. In 2009, there was a huge controversy when they recalled millions of cars because of dangerous floor mats. I know that almost sounds like a joke, but they would cause the accelerator to get stuck, and that is a dangerous situation that potentially led to the deaths of as many as 89 people. There is so much that could be said about this, but Toyota paid over $1 billion to settle a class action lawsuit involving the situation, and over $1 billion in criminal penalties to the US government, the largest criminal penalty ever imposed on a car company in the US. Once again, the timing of all of this was awful. It was during the recession when car sales were already struggling, leading to some unusually poor sales figures, and the following year, Japan was hit by an earthquake and a tsunami that affected their supply chain and significantly impacted production. So for reasons within their control and beyond their control, that was an unsettling time for Toyota. In 2014, it was announced that Toyota was one of many car companies impacted by faulty airbags provided by their supplier. Again, it was a harmful mistake where multiple deaths have led to troubling recalls that they are still dealing with. There are still plenty of Toyota cars on the road with dangerous airbags. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration called that one the largest and most complex safety recall in US history. In 2016, not exactly a recall, but Toyota agreed to pay more than $3 billion to settle a class action lawsuit involving truck owners who say that their vehicles did not receive adequate rust protection, and that has compromised the integrity of the frames. They didn't admit to any wrongdoing, but again, not a great situation. As recent as 2024, 2 Toyota companies have been in the spotlight for negative reasons. One involving irregularities in certification tests for diesel engines, and the other for forging results of safety tests, I guess for more than 30 years. It caused the head of the company to issue an apology, and you could see how high-profile incidents like these can make people look at Toyota differently and question whether or not it would be a smart or even safe decision to buy a vehicle from them. You have to admit, they have had a fair amount of bad publicity over the past 15 years and have been amazingly unimpacted by it. During that time, they have grown into the world's largest car maker, and it's yet another example of Toyota overcoming a potentially harmful situation. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about Toyota as a company and as a car brand? Are you impressed by their ability to rise above their problems in the same way that I am, taking over the Japanese auto market and then the US auto market and somehow holding on to all of it despite so much negative attention? Do you own a Toyota, and if so, are you happy with it, and what influenced your decision to buy it? I'm curious to see what you think about them, and if this video has impacted your opinion at all. And any other thoughts you have about Toyota, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.